Let me talk about some other dimension of the urban finance and governance. Ultimately, when we speak about finance and governance, the objective is to provide basic services. And all these things, when we talk about theory in terms of whether we have money or whether we have right systems and practices, should ultimately translate into some better service for some citizen somewhere. That's the intention. Now, the service level benchmarks, the studies which have been done in the country, the various reports which are published, kind of point out towards an angle saying that the government has really not delivered the service as what is required. So one means which we have been talking about in the last 10-15 years is to see where we can improve the services with the inclusion of private participation. That was the premise in which the kind of the words which are used, public-private partnership, have been configured in the country and been tested out in various forms. Urban is not really a good example of how it translates ultimately, but that's how it has actually panned out. So if you see again the premise of public-private partnership comes from an angle of service efficiency improvement on a project, not necessarily finance. I mean, while most cities and most governments start off talking in a PPP project because they want finance. Normally it doesn't come through simply because private sector is in the game if there's a business case. If there's no business case, they don't come in. That's the essential part of it. Now again, there are a lot of arguments for and against PPPs, and whenever I enter an audience, especially in urban, and talking about water or solid waste privatization, and I always get scared whether I get a lot of brickbats or when will I get bashed up before I go out of this meeting. But anyway, that's the kind of thing, and a lot of antipathy towards PPPs, especially in the urban sector. But I mean, we always keep arguing and saying that, look, even otherwise, when government is trying to deliver a service on its own, it's largely privatized. The design is done by a consultant, the construction is done by a consultant, contractor, the maintenance is done by a contractor, the repairs are done by a contractor, the collection is done by a contractor. So what is missing between this PPP and the currently what we are doing is only a kind of risk that we are forcing the private sector to take in a PPP format. They are putting their own money a little bit to the extent which is feasible in the project, and also trying to drag the operation maintenance period quite longer. Otherwise, we are accustomed to a kind of item rate or EPC contract where we pay the money and next time the road washes off. That's the kind of systems we have been following. By forcing them to look at investment and forcing them to look at maintenance, we are hoping the service will increase. That's the premise in which we have started. If you look at this, just a question of estimate, the question of who does the analysis, we can go around by, let's say, a few lakh crores here and there in terms of what is required for the urban sector, but the requirement is huge. It's quite immense. What we need to do, what we have to do in urban sector is quite immense. Now, everyone talks about one particular angle of to increase money from PPP. When the 26% is a number thrown away by McKinsey in their report. If you look at the HPEC report, they have a huge assessment in terms of what money is required. But all these things come back, we'll have to keep asking, where is this money going to come from? It has to come in 3-4 basic services, ultimately in urban sector. We have to be in water, or in solid waste, or in urban transport, a bit of roads and bridges and flyovers, etc. A lot of social forestry, footpath, this kind of activities. This is what is the gamut of the urban services today. But if you start looking at how we actually try to involve private sector and have we actually delivered those services, gives an indication of whether our governance and finance is in the right shape or not. When we don't involve private, the governance and the finances can be pushed under the carpet in terms of we really don't look at a life cycle cost, we don't really look at all the aspects in a project. But when we start looking at a private sector involvement, that is when these challenges start manifesting. So if you look at, so what I try to do here is to take selectively examples. Obviously, the sector is such a huge one, you cut it differently and use different examples, probably you'll get a different conclusion. This is just to illustrate what I think are the kind of lacunae in the governance and financing sector today in urban, and then how do we actually go about doing it. If you look at water sector, the trends are not really good. It's started way ahead, late 90s. Today we are in 2013. Quite a few projects we have seen. There are a few projects which we succeeded in the way, few projects which have failed in the way. But give or take in the country, we have done about roughly 30-40 projects in water PPPs, not more than that. It's not a huge number. If you look at roads, our own organization today is handling more than 50-60. So just multiply by another 30, 40, 50 in the country, we have the range of PPPs happening in India today. But in water, entire country has attempted only about 30, 40, a few here and there. Again, the way it started, where it ended, there are 2-3 problems which keeps coming, and that's the governance issues. Halfway through, most governments start realizing that probably going for a traditional contracting is a better method for all concerned for various reasons. The reasons could be genuine nature, reasons could be because there are a lot of money which is involved with these projects. So that actually created a problem, and that is a mindset which is there in the governance. how do we actually deliver a project is not necessarily with the intention of doing a good service, but in the intention of how the inputs in terms of money is flowing through over a period. So that has happened in various projects. I mean, Tirupur took so much time to actually come out, but then, I mean, it so happened that the demand risk actually materialized. By the time they did anything, the textile industry collapsed. So the water supply is in trouble. Vizag, they thought conventional contracting is much better. There are a few pilots who have succeeded. But how do you scale up from a pilot? Pilot is very, very small. I mean, we keep talking about North Karnataka project, which is the kind of a big one for everyone, and there's a model to be followed. But is it replicable? Do we have that kind of money? Is the governance system which are there for a small pilot of, let's say, 1 lakh connections, can I take it to 20 lakh connections? It's extremely different dynamics altogether. Also, the water is proven within 30 projects, we have at least 10 different models. So where is the replicability? Where is the scalability issues? So that's a challenge there. Try and see the other one. I mean, this is a slide which basically shows what happened in the JNURM, the 40 different projects we attempted in solid waste. Again, there's a huge range of variety and a huge range of plus and minus, and no city is actually able to deliver everything together at one place. So they tried integrated waste management, they tried collection plus waste, transportation combination, there's a processing plus landfill combination. So different combinations have been attempted. But again, the results are not really happening. Simply because all the urban projects essentially are not financially freestanding. Now, while we keep talking about why it is happening, why it is not happening, one, the issue is why it is not financially freestanding. It is a cost center. Governments are forcing revenue concept onto a cost center. Now, that's the mentality in terms of finance. How do you actually go about looking at how do you convert a cost center into a revenue center? It's not easy. I don't know it's possible also. And waste is something which there are statements, there are policies made, representations made saying that we can extract gold out of waste. So we have a 4% revenue asking from a contractor just because you want to take the waste and dump somewhere else. So that's the kind of system which have actually happened. The data is so uncertain in these kind of activities, both in water as well as waste. We simply don't know where we are heading. Trivandrum City Corporation, for instance, did 4 different studies, came out with a 300 tons average waste generation. But after the plant has been designed and set up for 300 tons, consistently for 1.5 years, every day average is 110. They're not able to deliver beyond that. So there's a problem. So how do we actually look at that? Bangalore, we are very closely involved in this. This is one of the first sanitary landfills here. And today there's a lot of debate in Bangalore on solid waste. Quite a few things went wrong. Most of the projects are on tipping fee basis, but however, the technology which probably we have to use has to be a low cost. But most developers today want a waste energy, which is a high cost technology. Urban transport, quite a few attempts have been made. There are a lot of combinations which are there. Quite a few metro projects are under news because we did a project which is the other way around, which is like a most likely with a real estate component involved. I mean, that's the model which we followed. Whenever we talk to any local government, be in Karnataka or elsewhere in the country, the configuration of projects is very, very simple. I have a piece of land, try and find some public use for it, put some commercial angle to it, and then develop a project. So it happens, good, well and good. If it doesn't happen, so be it. I mean, that's the way that most governments start thinking. That's where the projects start. So we have a huge pipeline of projects on these frameworks. I mean, metro, the urban transport also are configured in those angles. But what happens after the project is awarded? After the project bidder is identified, then the government gets cold feet, saying that can I award a project on this rate? Is the rate right? Especially in most PPP projects, we don't transfer the ownership of land to the private party. The ownership is always with the government. So only the rights to do some project has been transferred to the private sector. Government still owns the project. It's a long term, 30 years, 40 years, and the land comes back. So what is the acceptable price of the land? I don't want to name the projects, but Bangalore, we have a range anywhere between 10 crores per acre to 28 crores per acre, and every time government rejected it, saying that the right price is not acceptable. So what more can we get on a land which is 28 crores per acre, and then give the land back to government? So I don't know what is the right price, what is the wrong price. So we keep debating these issues. But again, this is an issue, challenge in terms of the mindset, in terms of how finance are seen in the government. There are different line departments as well as the finance department who are involved, and they keep arguing on what is the right price in this. The point is simple. I mean, suppose we have all the elements what I have talked about, a cost center being converted into revenue center, efficiencies have to be improved, and we have the other elements which are kind of critical in terms of documents, in terms of processes. Even if you get these things right, will you actually make things happen in terms of getting the services done? That's a question which we are not able to clearly answer at this point of time. There are a lot of ifs and buts, lots of concerns to be answered. The situation is not really, very conducive for a significant transformation of public services in the current frame. It's going to take some time. It's going to be a tough period going, like 2-3 years, 4-5 years like that. But there's a need which is required, there's a change which is required all over the place to try and improve the services. Now, one of the good attempts probably was the JNURM, attempt-wise, the principle-wise, the theory-wise. But actually translated into an action which is required and there's deliveries which were anticipated in the beginning, that's open to debate in terms of what is there, what is not there. So, there are a lot of, when JNURM was initially configured, there's a mad rush. Bangalore, for instance, mad rush for preparing CDPs, mad rush for preparing DPRs. So, Hyderabad, AP were kind of states which are very, very, forward looking. When they anticipate that someone is going to come with some scheme and keep some DPR ready. So, by the time the JNURM is announced, they are ready with 10 DPRs. So, Bangalore also had a kind of a CDP which is ready in some form. The moment the JNURM is announced, we were asked to put together something and then go and throw it to the government. We were thrown and badly ripped apart by IMA in the review. So I again came back and after that they said we are one of the better reports. But anyway, so that's how the cities think. It's a question of scramble for money, question for running behind what is there, how do we get the maximum amount from the funds available. So that was the thinking which was there. So but in this process we lost out the opportunity to improve our efficiencies, opportunity to improve the leverages in financing. All these things got lost somehow in the overall process. Then there are various attempts and practices in which different cities try to do in improving their finances. And the current the way it goes on is from a multilateral funding or a state government grants or tax buoyancy to the extent whatever is possible. And there are a lot of bonds which are being talked about. However, none of these actually got replicated in a bigger way all over the country for various reasons. And also we've never gone to the mentality of leveraging. So we have so much money available. How do you make it, how do you translate that into 10 or 20 times more in terms of projects? That actually thinking was completely missing in these systems. So that was a problem. So, but however, now post JNURM, post the kind of slowdown in the last 2-3 years, the governments have actually started thinking of what is the money available, the medium-term fiscal plans being made, trying to figure out how do you actually look at a long-term financing structures, how do you actually make things happen in terms of services. Now that thinking is coming in, but it's going to take some time. We are increasingly coming to a conclusion saying that PPPs can't actually, the way it is done on the road, the way it is done in other sectors can't necessarily be translated into urban sector. The one particular element which is missing in other PPPs was the civic society. It was extremely strong in a urban sector. And we don't engage, when we do a road project, we don't engage the toll paying community and don't ask their opinion. But in a civic society, whenever there is a solid waste project or a water project, necessarily we need to do that. So we are increasingly coming to a conclusion saying that we need to look at this more and more aggressively. And the way we should structure a project in terms of delivery needs to get all these stakeholders in one place and try and look at a solution which is probably meeting the requirements of everyone, not necessarily the government's perspective of getting money or efficiencies or the private sector requirement of getting some return on the project. Looking at things we think are quite hopeful. Cities have actually coped well. Having said all these things, when we wrote the CDP for Bangalore, the going theme was the transportation. A lot of issues in traffic problems. Is the movement is less than 14 kilometers per hour. Today is dramatically improved post that. Having said there are still problems, but cities are still managed under different situations. I'm sure they're going to manage. Cities are going to increasingly become larger. They will manage. But the question is, how do we actually ensure the governance systems and the financing practices percolate down to the lowest level? Who are the people who are actually going to implement? That's the challenge. I think hopefully with the capacities coming in, this will happen, but it's a long way to go. Thank you.